listening to The Power of Sound on Boombox Music Talk.
Hey, I want to have you read for this character. We're looking for kind of like this, resonant kind of guy with he's got a Hispanic accent, so he was like, have you ever watched King of the Hill? And I was like, I love King of the Hill. Yeah, of course. He's like, there's this guy on TV in King of the Hill. He's like a priest who fights people. And his catchphrase is, and before you could say it, I was like, Vaya con Dios.
Welcome to Boombox Music Talk. I'm Mark, and today on The Power of Sound, we are exploring the world of personas and the art of voice acting.
Yeah, exactly.
My guest today hails from Dallas, Texas, and is intimately familiar with the process of creating personas, whether it's his career as a UX UI designer, his voiceover work and animation in the video game industry, as well as embodying the role of clown in the Slipknot tribute band Sick. So, some of you may know him from some of his anime appearances that include One Piece,
Bring it!
My Hero Academia,
You shouldn't be pursuing personal grudges.
The Daily Life of the Immortal King and a Sign of Affection,
My liver is yours for destroying.
as well as additional voices here and there in properties such as Attack on Titan, Mobile Suit Gundam, and the Borderlands game. Ethan Gallardo, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, how's it going, Mark? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure you had offers from pros with much bigger followings than mine.
Been looking forward to this. It was really cool to find out about your music side as well, because to me, although anime is a very visual medium, just because of what it is. However, to me, the music and voice acting play such a pivotal role in what anime is, in shaping the entire direction, mood, feel of what you're producing, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, in any kind of medium, really, it's. I think people undermine how much music actually adds to how impactful those things are. I mean, I think about video games and animation specifically. Like some of those soundtracks or some of those like famous tunes that we hear, like if those didn't exist in those particular properties and stuff, I don't think it would have the kind of cultural, impact that we all know and love from those things. So yeah, it's a huge. They go hand in hand for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny that you say that too, because and just the process, I guess, of both of those things over the years, like it took a long time for people to realize, number one, just especially, I say people in the West, right, in North America, to understand what anime is and the significance of the storytelling, instead of looking at, we talked about this, we did an episode on Cowboy Bebop. Just that people for a long time looked at animation as kind of this lesser than thing, right? Like it's cartoons, and it's so much more than that. When you start looking into it, the depth of the storytelling gets into some really deep philosophical issues a lot of times.
Oh yeah.
Soon you'll know. Time will help. I feel sorry about your confusion, but this world's never really been about truth or lies. In this world, there's only one thing that's worth knowing. Hard facts. Despite this universal truth, people misguidedly choose to only accept the facts that appeal to their way of thinking. They're so limited, they can only accept the truths that are comfortable for them. So, this is simply about wanting to hang on to your personal power. Realizing things may not have been as we accepted them to be unsettles us. It's overwhelming. Are you absolutely sure that you know the truth?
And then the music, Jesus, once you start really diving into that, like when I first started getting into anime and I first started realizing, whoa, this is like full on like orchestra composing type work going on, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And it's cool to see that people are getting more credit for it. The art of voice acting, the composing, all these things that go around animation. People are finally getting some credit.
100%. I think it's even a really cool thing is I've seen, especially locally, or not just locally, but they tour, everywhere. They do full-on orchestra productions for like video games and anime. Like I think they had just done an orchestra tour for One Piece. Which is one of the biggest anime out there right now, but packed concert halls of people just wanting to hear their favorite songs from One Piece and stuff. So I think culturally just anime has exploded over the last 10 years or something like that. I think it's always been popular, but now we have anime films beating out entire box office records and stuff just because the cultural impact or the fandom has become that large. Yeah, it's really cool to be a part of. So
absolutely,
yeah.
My daughter had just sent me a TikTok, I think 2 days ago. She didn't know that you were coming by or anything. She just happened to come across that. I think it was what you were just talking about, the One Piece orchestra show that they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that kind of stuff, especially when you get to hear it live, man, and you can feel the reverberation, the resonance of the actual instruments. My ex and I also went down. I don't know if you ever heard that candlelight shows that they do, where it's a string quartet. Well, there's several of them, but it's a candlelight series they put on, and so they'll do different genres and different things. And one time we went to one where it's always just it's a quartet, but they did basically anime themes through the years. Some of the more popular ones, and even just that, even though it was a 4-piece, being able to hear some of that, live was freaking awesome.
That's cool.
And also, it's cool to see now that they're starting to mine both anime and the video game industry for transitioning into live action stuff too, like acknowledging this is cool shit, we should do more with this isn't just a game or a cartoon or whatever, no, these are evolved storytelling, deep storytelling mediums that we can utilize in other capacities. So that's been kind of fun to see with some of the, and I feel like Netflix, sometimes they get hate on because they'll do a season of something, they won't continue it, all that kind of stuff. But you can't overlook the impact that they've had to, if you rewind it, even better than I do, the companies like Funimation, Crunchyroll, played such a big part in just bringing anime to the States, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Just having that platform or, as a company being able to distribute anime to begin with, you know, is such a cool thing. Because before, I mean, I don't think I know all the history, right? But
Yeah.
I'd imagine if there wasn't a place to distribute anime here in the States, you would just have to deal with imports, right? You would have to do imported anime, and somebody would have to know how to translate it, how to subtitle it, and then if you wanted to go the dubbing route, like somebody, you know, you need a medium to be able to do all of this stuff.
Yeah, it doesn't happen by accident.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you can even go back and look at, you know, like the old school Power Rangers, right? It's like you had all of these, like, you know, these episodes of something that was filmed in Japan and then came over here and they spliced in, you know, live action actors and, you know, and made this whole thing out of it culturally. I'd say, I mean, Power Rangers, things like Godzilla, you know, old school, like the Speed Racer anime and things like that.
Here comes Speed Racer.
All these things coming in really kind of built, they were the building blocks to, you know, have that initial fan base to where some place was like, you know what, maybe we can sell this, you know, or maybe people want to see more of this, right? So I think places like Funimation definitely have their role in history about like getting, you know, anime to a wider audience for sure.
Super important
Yeah.
place in that. I know for me, because it was always like you could maybe go down to a comic book shop and they would have a couple, you know, maybe 3 or 4. But even then it was like you got to pay like $30 for 3 episodes maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe you don't even find, you know, next time you might have to skip that and you get the next volume that's like 6, 7, and 8 and you miss the middle part. And
Yeah.
it was a beating, expensive, just hard to find. So they really changed the game. The only reason I kind of mention Netflix in that way is because of the reach that they've had, right? I feel like they were the first ones that really had a huge base foundation to go, you know what, this is a important storytelling medium that we should tap into. And now they've started to do, you know, all their own stuff too, and really cool stuff to see, things that are also now being produced homegrown in America versus always taking something that's already been produced in Japan or somewhere and translating it over, right? So it's kind of been cool to see it. It's a different process, right?
For sure, yeah. I think the way that they've approached adaptation has been a really cool thing to see.
I've always been taught to be brave and strong, to see the hope when all feels wrong. I've always been taught not to be afraid, and look the price I pay. I am barely afloat, my sails are set, I'm coming home. I am barely afloat, my sails are set, I'm coming home.
Especially like with the most recent one being like the One Piece adaptation. I think a lot of people were really scared to see you know, this company try to faithfully you know, tell the story of you know, their favorite shows and stuff like that. But I think the consensus is that they really took a lot of love and care into making something you know, for people to enjoy, and I think that's a cool thing. I think streaming in general has, you know, really propelled the popularity of some of these kind of shows out there, you know. Instead of, I remember when I was growing up and first getting into anime, having to go to like a Best Buy or I think the store was called Suncoast.
You think that your space goes, you want it goes too cold. Fuck that shit, now I go my way and you go yours.
Hello, I am Space Ghost. Welcome to my show.
They don't have it anymore, but you know, you'd have to buy individual volumes of DVD. That was DVDs in general. Right. TV and DVDs in general was, okay, I got my 15 individual DVDs to, you know, my favorite series. Now you can just watch it, you know? And so I think just accessibility and the adaptation also goes into accessibility, you know, the way that people can enjoy stories has really, really propelled the popularity of some of these shows and stuff. Yeah.
Well, it's a chance to reverse engineer it then.
Right. Exactly.
You know? Like, because a lot of people, they don't even know, right? They're just like, here's this new, you know, whatever show, Cowboy Bebop or One Piece. So I'll check that out.
Right.
help you?
Yeah, you can kindly fuck off. It's nothing personal, but your mark's coming with me.
Oh, this was an anime before?
Especially,
what is that,
yeah,
you know?
shows like One Piece, they're going on 1,000+ episodes.
Yeah,
just
right.
knowing that, like, I mean, I'll say even for myself, I'm like, that's intimidating.
Yeah.
It's like I'm never going to catch up to this or whatever. But being able to watch, say, the adaptation and know this arc is, condensed into a couple of episodes. It's a little less scary, right? Like maybe I want to take the plunge then. And then if I want to go back and read it or watch it or whatever, I can. But, I think it's giving people options, to get into these stories and stuff.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, totally. It's daunting. Or even, and just for regular people, just even to look at something and say, 26 episodes or whatever, if they're not sure about the storytelling, it is easier to, bite-sized chunks a little bit to kind of dig in.
Yeah.
Or something that they're a little more familiar with. The longer I started thinking about putting this episode together, I really liked, this idea of personas because of, you kind of taking these three different paths of, the music that you're doing now being kind of a larger than life, character driven band. The work that you do in animation and video games, by the nature of it, is you have to develop a persona for what that is. And then also from a design perspective, the work that you're doing there to kind of talk about the end person. But before we dive too far into that side of things, I wanted to rewind just a little bit on just your history yourself to learn a little bit more about your background. So I saw that you had graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Visualization. So where was your headspace then? Where were you thinking, or even before you went to college, like where were you thinking you wanted to go, the direction?
Yeah, okay. So before college, I was kind of convinced that my life would kind of have something to do with acting. Just in general, I did a lot of theater in high school, and even going back to middle school, I had done theater. And outside of that, I had done improv at a very early stage of that. We had an improv troupe in 6th grade, which is
awesome. That's crazy.
Yeah, it was kind of a really early, I guess, exposure to that kind of you got to just think on your feet, right?
Yeah.
That's just how you do it.
I would have loved that in 6th grade.
I know, yeah, no, it was crazy. And, doing shows for parents or whatever it was, I'm sure it wasn't great. I can't remember, but doing that and doing theater, doing short films, student films, and then eventually participating in things like film races and things like that. So,
what's a film race?
So a film race is, so in my hometown, we had an organization called Cine El Sol, and we would do both 24-hour and 48-hour film races. They would give us a theme. They would give us a couple of things that needed to be in the film. So kind of like a scavenger hunt, or you don't have to go looking for it, but they have to be in the film.
Right.
And depending on the particular race, it would be either 24 hours to do it. So write, film, edit, do everything, or 48 hours. And me and...
This is when you're in high school?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
This was, me and a couple of other students from my theater group. They had kind of come together to be like, hey, we're all interested in acting and film. There was one student in particular, his name was Christian Blake, and he was like, I'm going to be a director when I grow up.
Yeah,
that's going to be my thing. So he was kind of, he took the lead in directing and stuff. And so we did a lot of films. But outside of the acting stuff, I was really enamored with animation. I grew up watching cartoons and animation and stuff like that. And I was like, I want to do that. I want to work for Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon, and I want to be an animator.
Right.
And so that's what kind of prompted my interest to looking for, schools outside of that where I would go and kind of try to further that interest.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I got to A&M, was they had the visualization program. At the time when I was looking, I wasn't aware of too many schools in Texas that were doing animation programs that weren't like trade schools or like, you know, an art institute or something like that. And so I ended up going to A&M for visualization, which sounds like a pretty general term, but specifically what they focused on was animation design and video game design.
Okay.
And they would kind of, you could focus on one, but they would kind of urge you to choose 2 of the 3 tracks to kind of focus on. And so that's kind of how I started pursuing that. Ultimately, I didn't end up going down that rabbit hole of, or not rabbit hole, but going down into, you know, professional, you know, industry animation. It's a very involved process. There's a lot of people involved. And, you know, I was for the time at least just more interested in kind of indie animation, you know, stuff that one person makes, you know.
Yeah, I guess I know. I just hate how it sounds. If I traded it all, if I gave it all away for one thing, just for one thing.
It was kind of a happy accident in college that I was pursuing animation and I was doing these things, but being around so many other creative people and being around so many like student projects, student films and stuff like that, and starting to get involved online with like early YouTube or the Newgrounds community, finding out that people need like sound design. That's a really important thing that people need. And before I even started doing voiceover, it was like a weird moment. It didn't click at first, where I was like, I can do acting with my voice. That was never a thing. I was a little dull when it came to this.
Well, again, it wasn't. I mean, you wouldn't have even thought about it because that industry hadn't really taken off as much here to even know to think about going down.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking about that at all. What I was thinking about was for like myself and my friends, all of our student films and student projects that we were working on, we were limited to royalty-free, you know, music and sound effects and stuff like that. So initially, I kind of started getting more into sound design, like so I was doing like Foley, I was doing like, you know, little soundscapes and stuff, because I've been into music for a really long time too, like making my own music and kind of just doing like experimental type projects. Music's been a massive part of my life for like as long as I can remember, and so I was really interested in things like that.
What is Foley? Foley is a sound recording process that is done after the initial stage of filming to enhance sounds that were not captured on the day. So a popular example of Foley would be clothes rustling or footsteps or something really minimal that wouldn't be picked up from the overhead boom mics that are used on the day of filming. In order to capture these sounds in crystal clear detail, you have to get the microphone extremely close to the point of interest. So if you wanted to record the sound of footsteps, you would physically have to put the microphone into the shot in order to hear those sounds. And if you had a boom microphone chilling in the middle of your shot, it's going to completely ruin your film. So you want to get rid of that and use the process of Foley sound recording. So the video has been filmed, all of the footage is in the edit, and it is now locked in place. This is where the video is handed over to the Foley sound recordist in order to capture those smaller sounds.
It kind of just dawned on me one day that like once my friends were doing less kind of just general animation work and they were doing more character work where, you know, they'd have to animate a rig for like a face and make them say something, you know, they kind of knew me as like the sound editing guy or the guy who does like that kind of stuff. And they were like, hey, can you do this or can you do whatever? And it was all over from there. I was just like, oh my gosh, I can do all of this stuff.
Yes,
like,
I can.
Yeah, exactly.
It was also just like a totally crazy accident, I guess, is that like I found out that where we had all of our classes, it was on the 3rd floor of that building. On the 4th floor was like graduate students only. And I was friends with a couple of the grad students because they were doing like theses and films for their stuff. Yeah. And they knew me as like, oh, you did film acting in your hometown, right? Okay, so can you be in our film? So I was doing film stuff for the grad students and they were like, oh, you're doing like sound stuff and whatever. You know, we have a recording booth in the 4th floor, right? And I was like, yeah, isn't that for grad students? And they're like, well, we can, we'll let you up there or whatever. And I became friends with the guy who kind of ran all the equipment. His name was Glenn Vigus, and he was a really nice guy. And he was like, nobody uses the sound booth. Like, even if you're undergrad, if you want to schedule something, just let me know and we can get you set up and stuff.
That's awesome.
So I had full access to this professional sound booth in my undergrad, and that's where I went to do, all of the student voiceover work that I, was doing with my friends. And that's where I went to go do all of the early indie animation voiceover that I got started in. And at the time I was doing, like I said, I was doing a lot of experimental music and song stuff. I was recording all of my stuff up there. And
oh, that's awesome.
It was all just, it all just kind of like fell into place that way, where I was just, I started realizing that I was like, there's kind of a path here, or a passion rather here for me to kind of explore. So
yeah.
That's when it really just kind of opened up to where I was like, that's when I started actively looking online for, does anybody need, help on their project or anything like that. So that opened that door for me.
Yeah.
While I was pursuing everything else in like design and animation and
right.
stuff. Yeah.
No, that makes perfect sense, because I was curious kind of, where those dots were connected and where the music side came in as well. It's so funny that you say that, because I feel like the experimental part, because that was me a lot too, like growing up, because I had 3 older brothers, all musicians. And by the time I came along, a lot of the stuff that I was writing was atypical kind of stuff. Like I was so interested in just trying to do something that was unique and different.
Yeah.
And, so when my brothers are, writing, traditional songwriting, my oldest brother's going to the Guitar Institute of Technology out in California, and is very like, understands, theory and doing all those things. And he would look at me like, why are you doing that? I'm like, because it sounds cool. Like I'm over there, just playing with sound effects on top of songs and, blowing bubbles into water, so it sounds like there's some kind of cauldron and just weird stuff to try to manipulate sound.
Well, yeah, 100%.
What can I do? I don't know. Let's try it.
I love that kind of stuff, and that's really what my whole thing was with. And this is kind of like off topic, I guess, but like I really got into when I first found out about like how vast music was.
Yeah, right.
I kind of just like went crazy on like just trying to figure out or listen to as many different things as possible.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to make my own stuff. And I don't remember exactly how, but I got really, this was back when it was like MySpace bands, people were uploading their music to MySpace, and it was really easy to kind of just click through a couple of different artists and like make connections with these like really weird, indie artists and stuff like that. But I got really into kind of like glitchy, noisy kind of, music, and the kind of stuff that I was doing was I didn't have a ton of access to instruments, but at that time like MIDI was pretty widely available in GarageBand and stuff like that.
Right.
So like my whole thing was like taking MIDI drum tracks and being like, okay, these are all notes for a drum, but what happens if I take a drum track and I transpose it into instrument tracks?
Right.
And so everything is like lined up, or they snap to the same locations because they're drums. Drums are very like, rhythmically they have to be on point, right? Because they carry the whole tempo and the rhythm and stuff like that, or tempo. But what happens when a guitar is playing the same, notes or whatever? What does that sound like? And that was kind of, and also like synths or like whatever, And it would come up with some pretty wacky stuff, and I would do like these weird vocals on top of it and stuff. And but I made a lot of really cool connections doing that and did a couple of shows like locally and stuff like that. I did like a battle of the bands at my college, and everybody was like, "What is this? Like this? I don't know how I got accepted." In
Ross
that,
Geller
like,
on Friends, he's doing the.
So I definitely weirded some people out, but I loved that kind of thing. I loved making people, raise an eyebrow or feel like a little uncomfortable or whatever. Like I was just like, yeah, cool. Made you feel something, right? Like,
yeah, that's right.
That's awesome because, and then if you fast forward, that's what you get. Probably maybe around 2010. When you start getting this explosion of genres of dubstep and glitch hop and all these things.
Skrillex came out with that first one.
Oh yeah. That was the first. He was the first person. I've told the story on the podcast before, but I'm at the lake with my friend Jasmine. She's an artist as well. She's got a beautiful voice, but this boat pulls up and he's playing Skrillex. I think it was Scary Monsters and Nice Sprites or whatever direction those words are interchangeable. But anyway, he pulls that on. I'm just like, immediately, what the fuck is that? I've got to figure out now.
Yes! Oh my god!
And I had to go stop the dude. I'm like, tell me what that is. He's like, Skrillex. And I was like, well, are you saying words?
Yeah.
What do you?
Yeah. What is that?
What do you think, Floyd? Is she going to make good on that promise?
A broken promise is a lot like a child's pinwheel. You have to be yourself, or at least within the confines.
What do you mean? Is that a person? Is that a band?
Yeah.
And then I did went down the rabbit hole of just, oh my God, there's all these different kinds of things. Because I came from a family that was based in rock music. But I, kind of being the younger one, came up and had a lot more of the electronic influence as well. The early, kind of stabbing westwards and, Trent Reznor's and all that kind of stuff. And so, in a lot of my stuff, it was involved a lot of synth and beats and things that were not just, traditional rock kind of stuff. And, playing around in Dallas and things like that, a lot of times it was cool and difficult, like you were talking about playing that show, because we were a little bit like Linkin Park had just started to get popular, and people like playing to a click and having other sounds play with you and that kind of thing. People didn't really do that a lot yet. It wasn't like, now everybody does that, but back then people didn't really know what to think about it. And so a lot of musicians, we were kind of like a musicians band where they all respected us, but getting a following was tough because they wanted to hear like country or metal. Like, you're mixing genres. I'm like, yeah, I know, it's cool, right? And they're like, well, kind of, like, no, this is going to be cool. Just stick with us,
In time, as life falls behind, and what you rewind is moments in time. As thoughts collect like puddles of tears, he bursts the fears and utters the worst for years and worse for years. He's like,
we were a little ahead of the curve, but it all came from that interest of just wanting to explore with sound, which is kind of, if you think about it, that's what voice acting is as well, right? When you sit down to work on something, there's got to be some play involved, right? Like, you don't immediately know what this character is going to sound like or what what approach to take, you've got to play around with it, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. A lot of the time, I mean, every time I step into the booth to record something, I go in with the idea of like, this is time to play. You know, it's something that you can take really seriously, and sometimes you should, but like for the most part, you kind of have to go in with that mentality of I'm just going to see what happens. Especially when it comes to anime dubbing, we don't get like an email of the script before, or we don't even sometimes, if you're not formally auditioning for something and you go in, you don't know what the character looks like, you don't know how the Japanese reference sounds. You're just going in saying, I'm ready to lend my voice to something. I don't know what it's going to be, but we'll figure it out when we get in there. And sometimes you can see it and you can make that decision and it matches up pretty well, but sometimes a director is like, oh, let's try something different, or maybe you're going further along the episode and we're like, all right, we're losing consistency, let's get back into finding that nice middle ground, or finding exactly where you need to sit in that is it's a fun challenge. It's a challenge, but it's part of the fun is seeing how you can create the character, right? Yeah.
That's scary going in. That's like going back to your 6th grade, ad lib days where you're like, okay, I don't know what this is going to be, but we'll figure it out, as we get going.
Exactly.
When we get there. And that's what I was going to ask, is how much you do have directors there to help guide the process and that kind of thing. So is it pretty standard that you've got somebody there to help guide the process? Is it a mainstream director, or is it just an audio engineer that has some notes? You know what I mean? Like,
Thankfully, like 9 times out of 10, I'll say, if it's anything like industry for like anime or video game, there's always a dedicated director, and a dedicated audio engineer working in tandem with you. Yeah. So good. The director is on top of, they know everything that they need to, and the audio engineers, they're like wizards. Yeah. It blows my mind how good they are at their jobs, because sometimes you're like, oh man, that take was awful, there's no way that works, and they're like, fixed it. You sound great. I was like, oh, whoa, okay, cool.
Yeah, you caused us a lot of trouble. Remember that and don't do it again.
So, everybody is like working together to make sure that this kind of works out. But the directors are always there to help out and, kind of guide you. Or if it's a reoccurring character and it's been a while. So I always like to talk about this character. I play a guy in My Hero Academia.
Whoa, whoa, it's alright, everything will be alright. Whoa, whoa, it's alright, everybody now we're here.
His name is Manuel, and he originally came out in season 2, which was 2016, I think. And they're in the final season of My Hero Academia right now, and
which is what, like 5 or 6, or
I think it's 7.
Okay, 7.
But one, we're close.
It's up there, yeah.
And after like 6 years or something, like.
Trying to find the voice again.
Yeah, he randomly came out. He's like, all of a sudden in all of these episodes, and the director will go into their database and pull. He's like, here's a reference of the character just in case you forgot, because well, you're working, you're doing stuff. I mean, I don't have every voice in my head, and I'm not going back and rewatching, my work and stuff. So it helps that they're like, oh yeah, we got you covered. Like, we'll make sure that we have the bases, covered for you. This is what you sounded like. So now we can, make sure we knock this out and stuff like that. But it's also like cool to see that. It's like, you never know, unless your character is dead. Even then.
Why'd you run off by yourself? Where the hell are you, Tenya?
Who's to say they won't come back? I don't know. Like, it's one of those things. Anime, man. It's just like anything can happen. And sometimes, your character comes back after 7 years or whatever. So
you get a call.
Yeah.
I couldn't think of any other reason why you'd come to my agency. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm really glad you did.
And you mentioned something interesting too. I wanted to touch on is the dubbing process. You know, just for people that are listening that may not take in a lot of anime or know that whole process, right? You know, you've got, and we referenced it a little bit earlier with the Netflix thing. You know, you've got huge percentage of it, right? That's being created with, you know, original Japanese casts. And so by the time it comes to you, it's a completed product that you're now having to put an American spin on, which adds to the complication a little bit, because you're not only trying to create this persona, but you're trying to create a persona to fit it into a finite amount of time for each line, depending on how the original person did it and how they animated it to that, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know, how's that? I don't know if you've ever been able to work on any projects that started where you got to do the fresh track or not. Has it all been on the dub side?
No, there've been a couple of projects where it's just the original. You know, it's mostly for more indie animation, I guess, but or a video game is like that too.
Yeah, that's true.
But no, that's completely right. The dubbing side is definitely like that, where you have the completed project or a completed product from Japan, and then somebody goes in and they adapt the script to English, which is a challenging thing in itself, because it's not just translating it, but it's also making sure that your new translation or string of words matches the mouth flaps of the character who is speaking a totally different language.
He thinks he's Bruce Lee. You want to bet?
Damn you! Wanna fight, huh? Fight me! Yeah!
You know, doing that, and then on top of that, adapting it in a way that some shows in Japan, like some references or expressions and stuff, they only make sense in Japanese, right?
Yeah,
you know, or jokes or whatever, and it's like, how do you make it fit, right? So yeah, that's the way that goes completely. And then on other projects, you know, it's like the director might come at you with just a script, you know, and they say, all right, this is the idea that we have for this character, you know, interpret it how you will. And at that point, you know, you have to go in and kind of create the idea of a character, or, you know, fill in the spaces that you need to give the director, you know, say, hey, how does this work? Or what do you feel about this? And then, you know, now you don't have a reference. You're creating your own reference, but you're building off of your own kind of interpretation of a character.
You're doing it to screen, right?
For dubbing? Yeah. So dubbing there's two screens in front of you at all times. One has the English script and the other one has the Japanese animation. And you're kind of darting, but you know, the way that they'll do it is they'll play a pass for you before, so you have an idea of the pacing and the tone and the, you know, the mouth shapes and stuff like that. And, you know, I like to read along and kind of mouth the words and stuff. And there's also a time stamp in the top where you can kind of, you know, see when things are going to start or finish. It's kind of like a lot of little micro adjustments that you're kind of, you know, all at once trying to figure out.
Here's what's going to happen. I am going to have to fix you, manage you on a more personal scale, a more micro form of management. Jim, what is that called?
Microregiment.
Boom. Yes.
And then they say, all right, let's do a pass of it. There'll be 3 beeps, beep, beep, beep. And on the invisible 4th beep is the beat where you start talking.
Right.
So
Watch carefully. 5, 4, 3.
You didn't say 2 or 1.
Oh, you don't say 2 or 1.
Why not?
You just don't. Okay? Now, it goes 5, 4, 3. Good. Okay. Good.
And then, you go through and you do all of that, and, you know, they make adjustments as needed and stuff like that. But It's pretty cool. It definitely is a technical skill in itself. It's a crazy thing to think about because you're acting. In one sense, you're acting, you're doing a character, sometimes you're doing a voice or whatever, but then you also have this like technical skill that isn't necessarily, acting at all. It's more analytical of being like timing and matching and, reading and, all at the same time or whatever. So it's kind of cool. There's always a lot going on and it's exhilarating in a sense, so.
Well, it's kind of like music in that sense where it's like, okay, you've got the drum track there. So you've got to be creative and come up with something on top of it, but you've got to stay in the lines, right? Like you can't go too far off that because it's going to sound like shit, right?
Right.
So and it's funny too. I was just having a conversation with someone the other day because at the time of us recording this, James Earl Jones has just passed away.
Right.
And to think about on the topic of voice acting, if you go all the way back to 77 with Star Wars coming out.
You are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take her away.
You are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take her away.
You don't know the power of the dark side.
James Earl Jones is doing voice acting. Like he's not in that costume. It's a completely different person. The motions of that performance are guided by the person, David Prowse doing that performance. So now when James Earl Jones comes in to do Darth Vader,
you don't know the power of the dark side.
It's the same process. He's doing the same overdubbing process.
Yep.
So there's a whole side of it that from going back to your traditional route of acting too, like I don't think people realize how much people in TV and movies do overdubbing as well, where they might not be doing it to someone else now, they're doing it to themselves, but they're still back in the booth having to read the lines again and match up with how they gave the performance in the first place, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. Even in film, a lot of the time is, just matching up audio with, if you're in a noisy space or something like that, it's like we need a fresh pass or we need audio to be done over that. And even in dubbing stuff that isn't like main character stuff, we have a category of voiceover called Walla.
Giggity, 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 ooh, ee, ooh, ah, ah, ting, tang, walla, walla, bing, bang, ooh, ee, ooh, ah, ah, ting, tang, walla, walla, bing, bang.
That's essentially background characters and things like this. And, this is where I think...
it's like Foley for voice.
Exactly.
People are often puzzled that this isn't all done by computer.
In order to get the right feel of a character, you need to really know how they're feeling.
Everything that I create on the stage is organic, using props and recorded precisely for that film.
Foley is the art of putting sound effects to picture after a film has already been shot.
See that big gust of wind on the right, so I gotta focus on that and get that perfectly, each little flutter happening right there. Now it's cut to a huge close-up.
When they shoot a film, the sound is concentrated on the actor's dialogue, so we go back and recreate all these sounds for drama and detail, and just to bring the film to life.
That's precisely what it is. And that's also why I believe that improv is, not just because I've done a lot of it, it's such an invaluable skill to have as an actor, because for Walla, the script is just, it goes from lines to general chatter. Yeah, exactly. And sometimes gasps. Yeah, gasps are like, you're in a market setting or whatever, and you have to create your own scene just based on a suggestion, right? And when it comes to doing Walla work, sometimes the cue is 10 seconds, right? And you can just be like, excuse me, how much is the fish over there? Or whatever. You're like, all right, I said my one thing, I'm done. Yeah. And you're doing it with like 4 other people, so it's a bunch of people.
And action.
This doesn't have to be
It was okay in a cage over there. They not see anything. They not feel anything.
But sometimes that cue is 5 minutes long, you know, and you have to continuously have a
you're doing the background track
stream of consciousness, you know,
Yeah.
and it could be that general market chatter, or you could be psychopaths on a prison island, you know, leading a rebellion, and you have to get creative with what you're doing, you know, and then you do your 5-minute pass with everybody, and then the director says, all right, that's good, let's get another pass, and you have to do something completely different for 5 minutes or whatever. So like, luckily working with people in those settings is great, because you can play off of somebody's, you know, character choices or whatever. But still, there are times, you know, you do it and, you know, I've seen people just go blank, you know, they're just like, I don't know what to say, you know, anymore. And, you know, it's one of those things where you have to be kind of just able to adapt on the fly and stuff like that. But that skill of improvisation.
Don't ever, for any reason, do anything to anyone for any reason ever, no matter what, no matter where or who you are with, or where you are going, or where you've been, ever, for any reason whatsoever. Sometimes I'll start a sentence and I don't even know where it's going. I just hope I find it along the way, like an improv conversation. Improvisation.
Just kind of being that, like, you know, social chameleon or whatever you want to call it. Like it has done wonders in acting, because it is such a great skill to have. But even outside of acting, you know, being able to fit different roles as you go along doing whatever day to day, it's a really, really great skill to have. I actually encourage a lot of people ask, how do I become an actor? How do, you know, do all this stuff?
Right.
You know, getting your feet wet in acting and stuff is a great way to start, but improv is a great skill to learn.
Yeah.
But it's also really good for people who struggle with like interviews or struggle with like social situations or whatever. Like, I encourage people to do like a free improv workshop or just whatever.
What brings you by?
I came by for my part of the inheritance. Nice gas station you opened up.
Thanks. Apparently he'd forgotten why he was kicked out of town in the first place. The sheriff caught him giving his wife a lube job in late November. I wasn't going to bring it up again. I knew it was a touchy subject with him. Haven't seen you since the lube job.
Hey! Come on! What the hell? Never mention that again!
Sorry, it's lit.
Because it will really help you with, you know, just socially being able to keep something going, keep that ball up in the air, or whatever, however you want to say it. It's a super, super important skill to have when you're doing these kind of like creative ventures. I think improv just keeps your mind open to the possibilities, right? So but Walla can be, it depends. Sometimes it's really chill. Sometimes you're like, this is crazy, you know?
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, because I hadn't really thought about that aspect of it. I mean, I catch it when I'm watching something and I think about it, but I haven't thought about the art of going in and trying to record that from scratch and produce that. That's a good tip about the interviewing thing. I'm going to remember that, just from a talent acquisition standpoint of telling people if they're working on that skill, because you're exactly right. I mean, that ability, it's the same thing for music too. It's like even though in the bands that I've been in, a lot of times it's very scripted. We play to a click. Everything is mapped out. We know exactly how it's going to go. But if I operated that way all the time in music, then it would be very difficult to find my creative groove, where it's important to have times where you're jamming with people and you're just ad-libbing, playing with stuff and exercising that side of your mind. why I always enjoyed being able to play in cover bands at the same time, to have some freedom of that, to be able to exercise that side of things a little bit more. It's an invaluable part of that.
Phase 2 Class Elite, Wang Ling.
Let me ask you this: in terms of, in terms of some of the stuff that you've done, has there been anything that resonated with you the most, like that you really dug, that character or that storyline, whatever the process was that you really kind of got into and were a little bit more invested in, I guess maybe?
Yeah. I mean, every time I get to go in there is just like a special little moment, right? Because when you break it down, I don't know. When a director casts you in a show, they're really just putting their trust in you to be able to do the work, right? Yeah. So sometimes it's just kind of like an honor in that, from that aspect. But some characters mean a lot to me just from, I don't know, kind of silly standpoints, I guess. So like, I play a character named Wang Ling in The Daily Life of the Immortal King.
Yeah.
And he's the protagonist. He's the main character of the entire show. But of all the characters in the show, he talks the least.
Right. Yeah.
He's basically God in this universe, and he's just so he's kind of just a melancholy, like nonchalant kind of, I guess.
Yeah.
Most of my lines are just like and it's like, how many variations of that can you do and still make it unique, kind of thing. And every time it's just kind of like a special little treat of just like, how can I make this guy sound more annoyed and bored, I guess.
Yeah.
That's been my first lead that I've had, and they're going on their 5th season now.
Yeah.
And that's kind of crazy to think about. I mean, just from that aspect of like, I mean, I don't think I would have ever thought of having a character go across like 2 seasons or whatever, let alone 5, and also the main character,
Yeah.
So like, I also think it's kind of really funny in that aspect of like, yeah, I'm the lead of the show, and he barely talks. Like, that's just like really cool to me. The other guy that was like really special to me was a character in One Piece who his name is Senior Pink.
That's supposed to hurt me.
And he's kind of this big burly pirate man who wears a diaper and a baby bonnet.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and sunglasses. And his whole persona is about being hard-boiled, which is basically just a manly man.
Yeah.
And going into that, I was approached by the director, Mike McFarlane, and he had asked me, hey, I want to have you read for this character. We're looking for kind of like this, resonant kind of guy with he's got a Hispanic accent, so he was like, a little bit of George Clooney, like that smoothness in his voice, and a little bit of like Antonio Banderas kind of sound. And then he was like, actually, have you ever watched King of the Hill? And I was like, I love King of the Hill. Yeah, of course. He's like, there's this guy on TV in King of the Hill. He's like a priest who fights people. And his catchphrase is, and before he could say it, I was like, "Vaya con Dios." And he was like, that's what we're going for,
Even in a wedding dress, Monsignor Martinez looks hot.
That is one sexy priest.
So Senior Pink, he's just big burly man, kind of, hello pirate, kind of thing like that. And his whole thing is about just being a manly man, and his backstory is absolutely tragic.
That cold, dark rain kept pouring, just like in my heart.
I found out about his backstory like halfway through recording his character, and I was like, if I had known, like, I wouldn't have been able to do this. I'd be crying the whole time. This poor man. This poor man.
Seems like the rain you enjoyed so much finally let up.
Yeah, Senior Pink is really cool just because of the character that he is. And it's kind of funny. I went to Anime Expo this year in July, and I found a guy who was cosplaying as Senior Pink, and I was like, I need a picture with you.
Nice.
And I told them I was the dub actor, and they were really excited about it. We got a picture and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like that character a lot too. So
when you were talking about that, about the tragedy of it though, that's what I think is that so many people probably that don't watch anime don't understand is the depth of it, because they might just catch one thing and think, oh, it's super goofy or whatever, and they don't realize that there's any kind of genre you can think of for a TV show, you can think of for anime. It's not a one-stop shop. There's so many different kinds, and even within those, most of the time there's depth like that, where you've got this super goofy looking character, and it's probably in very outlandish situations and all this, but there's this deep tragic backstory to it, and there's so much of the anime storytelling is like that. There are this deep emotionally resonating kind of themes going on underneath the wow exterior, right? Which I think is just, it kind of takes me back to the persona thing, because when you start talking about personas, like in school I studied ancient world literature and ancient world history, so I studied a lot of like Greek mythology and that kind of stuff. And the word persona comes from the Greek word, which I will not probably be able to pronounce correctly, but prosopon, which means face or appearance or mask. And in classical Greek theater, the prosopon referred to the mask worn by actors to represent a character or social role, right? Because they literally wore masks to show what that character was back then, right? It was a part of it. And I love that idea, because I'm always thinking about just, even in normal everyday life, we as humans are constantly kind of creating personas. There's a philosopher that I watch a lot. His name is Jason Silva. I don't know if you ever heard of him or not. Venezuelan guy, and he's super smart. But he was talking one time about this quote.
And so the philosopher by the last name of Cooley, he was a sociologist, and he wrote about the looking glass self theory. And basically what he said is that we come to be through the interactions that we have with other people by making models of the other person's mind. In other words, he says, I am not who I think I am. I am not who you think I am. I am who I think you think I am. In other words, we make renderings of what other people think of us and actually play the role of becoming who we think they think we are. But in the end, we never actually get to know other people's minds. All we get to know is our modeling of their modeling of us. So at the end of the day, we live inside of a construct of our own making.
And it's that whole kind of like, does art imitate life or life imitate art kind of thing? There's a feedback loop constantly going on just in our daily lives about, what setting I'm in, who am I around. And a lot of times you're going to embody the persona of what that person even thinks that you are for that situation. You try to remain faithful to who you are, but we're always kind of morphing into these various personas like that. You know what I mean? It's kind of it's an interesting thought.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And I think that goes outside of just the perception of people as well. I think it's sometimes it's a matter of perspective and a matter of power of that perspective. You know, even things that are just internal, things with yourself. You know, it's where you choose to place your energy, where you choose to place your attention or your affection and stuff. Like, can also dictate the way that you know, react to those things. Yeah. And sometimes it's like if you just shift the perspective, or if you just shift where you're putting that attention or energy, the ripple effect, it follows suit, right?
Always remember, your focus determines your reality.
And same thing with people. Sometimes in the acting world, a lot of people talk about imposter syndrome, you know, and the way that people perceive you and stuff like that. It's like sometimes, truthfully, you know, like truthfully, people probably aren't even thinking about you most of the time, right? But you do one thing or you have one interaction, and you're like, they think I'm the biggest, you know, fool of them all or whatever, and it's like doesn't mean anything most of the time, But it is. I'd be curious to like hear that full thing. I'll have to look them up to check that out.
But you mentioned intention. I mean, I think that's why that's so important, right? So that you are behaving with some type of intended outcome instead of unconsciously or subconsciously, rather being guided by what you were saying, by those people you're in or those interactions or whatever. It's so important to have kind of laid out, whether it's in general positive affirmations or very specific, like this is what I want to do, this is what I want to obtain, this is, you know, what I want to achieve or whatever. Yeah. Because if you're not operating with that intention, then where are you going to end up? And so, which crosses into this whole conversation with acting, with music, with all these things. Like it is good to be able to ad-lib and play off of people, but you also have to kind of have your unique slant on things to become whatever you're trying to become, right? If you're trying to do traditional acting, voice acting, music, whatever, you know, as a designer, talent acquisition, whatever you're doing, like you have to have that kind of intention, because otherwise the persona might be created without, I mean, you see it all the time now in today's society. There are a lot of people, especially right now, that I feel like are just guided into ways of thinking and being without realizing that they're doing it. I just thought that idea of it kind of crossing those three boundaries of the anime, games, and music.
Yeah, exactly.
Even with the band that you're in, Sick, the Slipknot tribute band. We were talking off air when you first got here, and you were talking a little bit about having the role in the band of having to do a lot of design, flyers, promo, all these kinds of things. And I thought that was so cool because, you know, the person that you're playing in this project is the persona, the clown. And when I was looking up his kind of history, he is one of the people that plays a very pivotal role in their media production, music videos. I don't know. Did you know that? I didn't know that about him.
Yeah, he's a very artsy kind of guy. Yeah. Well, I mean,
this is perfect.
I had learned about that like later on too. You know, like going into it wasn't. You know, I didn't join the band because I'm the biggest Slipknot fan in the world. Right. I did it because I love music, and it's a challenge. It's a role. It's performance, right? So I welcome that challenge, right? But learning more about it, Sean Cran, the clown, he's a very artistic dude. He, you know, does a lot of painting, does a lot of media, a lot of experimental stuff, and I thought it was a kind of an interesting parallel that I also like doing that kind of stuff. I like, if I can help it, I like making my own masks in the group, and I like, you know, doing just creative stuff. I need that kind of stuff, and I feel like it's just a personality type that maybe we both share. But like, what a crazy coincidence!
Yeah,
you know,
it's awesome.
So, definitely.
So how did that come about? Did you already know them? Were they just put out a call for people when they're forming it? I mean, how did that come about?
Yeah, so the guy who formed the band, I had already known him, but how I had met him was right before the pandemic. He was looking for people to be in a System of a Down tribute band. And I love System of a Down, so that was actually like a formal audition where I as the front man. So I was like, I'm gonna record
That's
some.
an undertaking.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I love singing the stuff, but like once we got going, it was a lot. You know? So yeah, I had done some.
He's a diverse dude.
Very. Very diverse, yeah. And I did, I eventually, after submitting some recordings, and, they were like, we're interested in you doing the thing and doing a bunch of practices and a couple of shows. That's what I was doing before. So that's how I had met them. And like you said, it was a huge challenge, not just doing the role or singing the songs, but also that was my first introduction into like a formal, like professional band setting, right? So, we were doing shows where we were doing, hour 40 sets, kind of things like that with the in-ears and the click tracks and everything brand new, completely new to me.
A lot to take off.
You go from garage bands to, this kind of thing.
Wake up! Run, rush, and put a little makeup. I discuss the fade away the shake up. Why'd you leave the keys up on the table? Here you go, create another fable. You wanted to. Grab a brush and put a little makeup.
And then also trying to juggle the voiceover and everything else. And, it was a lot.
Well, I don't think you trust in my self-righteous suicide. I cry when angels deserve to die.
I eventually was like, I think I need to take a step back or step down from this. And it wasn't difficult to find a new vocalist, and he's amazing at what he does and stuff. But the guy who was in that band, maybe like a year or two later, and we were in talks of other bands too, like for a little while before Slipknot, he wanted to get a Doors tribute going, and he wanted me to do Jim, and I was like, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Things are about to explode, Jim. You can feel it in the air. People want to fight or fuck, love or kill. Vietnam is right out there, man. Sides are being chosen. Everything's gonna flame, man. The planet is screaming for change, Morrison. We gotta make the myths.
There are the great orgies, man. Like when Dionysus arrived in Greece, he made all the women mad, leaving their homes and dancing off into the mountains. Should be great golden copulations in the streets of L.A., man.
We should call ourselves Dionysus, man.
I got a name. Doors.
Hello, I love you. Won't you tell me your name?
That would be a fun one.
Yeah, it would be fun. But before
Definitely
that,
less taxing than Surge.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. Minus the leather pants, right. But and then he was like, "Hey, doing Slipknot thing. We have these roles filled. There's 9 members in Slipknot. We have these roles filled. Do any of these interest you, or are you interested?" And some I was like, I just can't do. Like, Sid does DJing. I don't have any DJ equipment. I just. But I was like, you know what I can do? I can smash a keg with a baseball bat. I can do that.
I'm really good at that.
I'm really good at that.
What do you think about that?
Thought about it. I'm in.
And the role of the clown just kind of called to me.
Give me the dust of my father.
This is a bit of a personal thing, or a bit of history, I guess. Is my grandparents were actually professional clowns.
Oh.
They did clowning and they were magicians.
That's awesome.
And they would do like events. They would dress up as like the Easter Bunny or the, Santa Claus. They were, did all that stuff. So I'm kind of fond of clowns. People are either terrified or, they love them. And I love clowns because of that. And so,
wow.
And also in high school, I mascotted. I was a mascot. And so the idea of just,
you've been around personas your entire life.
Yeah. It's all about just stepping into another role, and stepping into a different persona. So I've done a bit of clowning and I've done mascotting. And so the idea of performing behind a mask, I was like, I love the idea.
Pagliacci, tragic clown. Pagliacci.
What did you say?
What are you, a cop?
No, I'm a clown.
You look familiar.
You ever been to the circus?
Oh, when I was a kid.
Did you like it?
Well, it was fun. I was kind of scared of the clowns.
Are you still scared of clowns?
Yeah.
It's another thing too, is like stepping into the role of somebody else, right? And I'm the kind of guy, like if I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna go hard, right? So
right.
I'm gonna watch the live videos, I'm gonna watch the performances, how they evolve over time. I'm gonna see how Sean does it, you know? And that's what I'm gonna do on stage. But I'm gonna add a little bit of my own thing too.
Yeah, right.
And it's about agency, right? I think that goes back to what we were talking about before, is you can be influenced by everything and you'll be tossed around, right? But having your own agency and taking influence and being able to apply that influence in the way that you do it is a huge part of how you present yourself, And the number of times that I have people come up to me after a show saying, you were my favorite thing to look at. Or I've seen Slipknot 20 times and you do it just like they do, or, something like that. It's just like that affirmation to be like, I'm doing something right,
Right.
Because you don't always get that feedback, but when you hear it, you're just like, this is amazing. And just the energy from crowds or people in general, it's a whole nother, element to it.
Yeah.
So this past week, Slipknot played here in Dallas and I saw them for the first time ever.
I felt the air rise up in me, kneel down and clear the stone of leaves. I wander out where you can't see, inside my shell I wait and bleed.
I bought my seat to be right in front of, I saw the whole band, but I was right in front of where Sean was, and I was like, I'm taking mental notes, at the same time. I want to research or study for that role, is what it kind of is to me, stepping into that role. It's been kind of a cool, crazy, like liberating kind of experiences to be, how creative can I be on this stage? Like, I have to play to a click and I play all my drum parts and stuff, but like, what am I doing when I'm not actively playing?
Yeah, right.
Am I interacting with the crowd? Am I acting like I'm going crazy on stage? Am I doing a little dance? Am I whatever, You
got to do your Walla 5 minutes in the background.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. How much is the fish? Whatever they say. But it's a challenge in itself, but it's a fun challenge. It's been a really, really great experience. And man, there's so many layers about it too, is because there are 8 other bodies on that stage. How am I going to interact with them? Right? What am I going to do with them? Is it going to be different from the last show?
Yeah, right.
Every stage is a different size.
Yep.
Some stages were shoulder to shoulder. Some stages I could do laps around it, Like, what are we going to do? And it's just a playground for creativity, and at first, I mean, going into it, admittedly, I was really nervous. I was like, I don't know if I'm the guy for this. I'm nervous. I'm scared. Yeah. I'm scared also. I mean, you're sealed in a jumpsuit and a latex mask for almost 2 hours.
Yeah.
Hey, what are you wearing?
It's a hazmat suit. That stands for Hazardous Materials Men's Suit Wearing. If you rent more than 4 times a year, it just makes sense to buy.
What is going to happen? I don't know. But at this point, you know, it's been such a treat to have fun and play on stage every time. That's the way I describe it too. You know, it's like some people probably think we take ourselves really seriously, you know, but we're a bunch of 30-year-old men playing Halloween on stage. Is essentially what we're doing, right? So at the end of the day, when I'm done playing, I'm just going to be me again. You know, I'm not the clown off stage, right?
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, that's right.
And the same goes for if it's an anime role, you know, I'm not that character off, you know, outside of the booth or whatever the case may be. So it's about putting on those masks and stepping into those personas and things like that. And at the end of the day, it's just I can feel fulfilled by the work that I do and things like that, and continue to just try to improve, really. So
yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah. I think that's a perfect place to kind of wrap this conversation up, because it is kind of the summation of a lot of what you've been doing. Because, you know, when you're in the booth doing an overdub, you've got to bring your own spin to it, but you're also masking or mimicking something else. You've got to play to that thing that's already there. So you're used to doing this. You're used to looking at something and having to kind of match things up to a certain degree, yet still be creative at the same time. And just that's crazy with your parents, and just I'm really glad that I took this path then on the persona. I love it when it's a happy accident like that, when things work out that way, because you know, I definitely see how that's probably guided you, you know, that idea throughout most of these things without really, you know, consciously thinking that that's why you're gravitating towards those things, right?
100%.
But it feeds into it, man. So thanks for coming on the show. I know we've been planning this for a little while, but really glad to have you here. Where can people keep in touch with you, with what you've got going on in the anime world, the band, any of that kind of stuff?
For sure. Well, I'm probably most active on Twitter. I still call it that. But, Ethan Gallardo. Yeah,
exactly.
Ethan Gallardo, VO on Twitter, or EthanGallardoVO.com is my Squarespace website, where I have an email form. People can reach out to me there.
Okay.
Just say what up, and I'm around.
Awesome. Sweet. Yeah, you guys listen and definitely keep in touch, so you can check out a show or check out his upcoming projects and the work he's doing. Go back if you have not. Take a look at some of the anime that he's been in before. Be a good chance to broaden your horizons if you have not gone down that path with some of those. For on the Boombox side, you can always go, the easiest way is to go to our link tree. It's linktr.ee/Boombox Music Talk. You can get to pretty much everything there. And as always, take a look at the YouTube page. I'll definitely have a lot of clips from both the animes that we've talked about, the music, all of that kind of stuff. I'll try to throw on the playlist that we talked about here, so you can dive in a little bit further there. But man, thanks again. Appreciate you coming on, and was really stoked to have you come into the studio and have this conversation. So
nice.
For Boombox Music Talk, we urge you to enjoy the journey and stay zen. Production.
And scene. Let's eat. This looks fabulous.
Yes, I'm gonna eat everything, and it's all Itsu's fault.